Today, we're going to look at a few interesting things. I continue, pressing the remote. The projector hums to life, displaying crisp footage from a security camera, Victoria directing a tow truck as it hauls away my Mercedes at 1 in the morning. This is from 4 days ago, I say. Take a close look at the timestamp, 1:13 a.m. Now, let's check the HOA rules about towing. I click again, and up comes the regulation, drafted by Victoria herself. Section 47 requires all towing to happen during daylight hours with 60 days prior notice. Not one of us got even a single line of warning. I show more clips of nighttime tows from other residents' homes, each image like a dagger, exposing blatant abuse of power. I'm Julian Maxwell, 42 years old, a judge from the quiet suburbs of Fairhaven, my home now after more than 2 decades working in the justice system in the big city. I've spent my life fighting for fairness, day after day on the bench, listening to heartbreaking stories and ruling to protect the innocent. Fairhaven was where I chose to unwind, to find peace after tense trials. But now it's turning into my own personal battlefield. Leave a comment with the number 9 so I know you're ready for the next twists in my story. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the gripping details still ahead. I drive into my neighborhood after 7 long days at a legal conference, aching to collapse onto the familiar bed in my little house at Pineview Heights. The sunset casts long shadows over neatly trimmed lawns where every blade of grass seems forced to meet Victoria Langston's harsh standards. She's the self-proclaimed queen of the homeowners association here. But as I turn onto my street, a sick feeling rises in my chest. My driveway is empty. My sleek black Mercedes, the one I worked 7 years to earn, gone. My hands tremble as I park the rental car and stumble out, my heart pounding like it's about to burst. A glaring yellow notice hits me in the face, taped crookedly to my doorbell. Victoria Langston's smug, scrawled signature sits boldly at the bottom, a name I've seen too often on ridiculous fines. The paper claims my car broke some new rule about work vehicles, all because of a court parking sticker on the windshield. I checked the date. It was issued 4 days ago. 4 days. I'd been gone barely a week and they moved this fast? Anger flares up inside me, burning hot like a flame. Mrs. Larson, my elderly neighbor from next door, hurries over, still in her gardening clothes, her eyes wide with panic. Julian, I tried to stop them, she chokes out, her voice shaky. She says a tow truck crept in at 1 a.m., dragging my Mercedes away without a word of warning. She'd held up her phone, showing them photos of my car parked legally in the driveway for years, but Victoria just coldly threatened her with a $700 fine if she interfered. I paced the empty driveway, my mind spinning, searching for a clue, not a drop of oil, not a shred of justification for this. Furious as I am, I hold it in, telling myself I need to uncover the truth. My phone buzzes with a text from Miles Donovan, who lives across the street. Check your security camera, you won't believe it. I unlock the door, hands shaking so hard I nearly drop the keys, and catch a glimpse of Victoria at her 3rd-floor window, binoculars in hand, her icy stare tracking me like prey. She's been HOA president for 4 months, ever since old Mr. Holloway, the respectable former head, quit out of the blue with no explanation. Since then, Pineview Heights hasn't been peaceful. Victoria's turned it into her private kingdom, measuring every blade of grass, fining people for nonsense like a flower pot in the wrong spot or a bike left out too long. Inside, I find 8 violation notices stuffed under the door, each one more absurd than the last. Unauthorized occupational parking, improper display of court permit. The final one mentions emergency seizure rights, a rule I've never seen in 12 years of living here under the HOA. I boot up the camera system, my heart thumping like a war drum. The footage freezes me in my tracks. 1:13 a.m., Victoria, in pricey pajamas and a gleaming pearl necklace, directing the tow truck with wild excitement, waving her arms like a conductor leading an orchestra. She even pauses to snap a selfie next to my Mercedes as it's dragged off. But what chills me to the bone is this: a shiny white Lexus pulls up. A man in a sharp suit steps out, chatting with Victoria. In the camera's dim glow, I spot the resemblance on their faces. It's got to be her brother-in-law, the shady used car dealer from the outskirts. They point at my car, laughing, and what I can make out from their lip movements makes me want to scream in rage. I've seen every kind of fraud in the courtroom, but this time, it's different. It's aimed right at me. They don't know I've just been appointed as the judge overseeing civil property disputes in this district. Sitting in my empty house, staring at the driveway where my Mercedes should be, I realize this isn't just about a missing car. This is a deep swamp of corruption, and I swear I'll drag it into the light. My phone buzzes again as I rewind the footage. Miles knocks on the door, his face tense, clutching his phone tightly. Judge Maxwell, you've got to see this, he whispers, glancing over his shoulder like he's afraid of being watched. He plays a video from the community pool area, filmed 2 days ago. Victoria stands among her lackeys, her voice brash and commanding. They think they can park whatever they want in their own yards? I'll clean this place up one ugly car at a time. She brags about seizing the Miller's delivery van because it lowered the neighborhood's value and Mrs. Larson's grandson's car because it looked too run down. She waves a stack of papers, laughing loudly. Pineview Heights will get prettier every day, thanks to me. Miles leans in, murmuring, I've been watching her for 8 weeks. She targets newcomers, quiet folks, or anyone who dares speak up at HOA meetings. But this is the scary part. He shows me another video, Victoria meeting the man in the suit behind the clubhouse, flipping through car photos on her phone. The guy nods, scribbles a check. Right then, my work phone rings, the court confirming my new role. Rage blazes inside me, scorching the calm I've honed over 12 years as a judge. Miles, we've got to find out where my car went, I growl. He smirks, pulling out a small notebook. I'm already on it, Judge. I'm not just your neighbor, I'm an investigative reporter for the Fairhaven Chronicle. Victoria's just the tip of this corruption iceberg. Just then, Lily Larson, Mrs. Larson's granddaughter, rushes in, tears streaming down her face. Judge Maxwell, they just took my grandma's car too. She needs it for her doctor visits. Through the window, I see Victoria strutting down the sidewalk in her pricey high heels, clipboard in hand, ready to hunt her next victim. She has no idea her power game is about to collapse. I start to call the court, but a detail in the footage stops me cold, a familiar car from the courthouse lot peeking out behind the tow truck. Pieces start falling into place, but I need proof. I turn to Miles, my voice firm. Want an exclusive story about corruption that stretches way beyond this neighborhood? My hands tremble hard as I open an email from the county clerk's office. Auction records show my sleek black Mercedes, worth over $70,000, sold for a measly $8,000 to Langston Luxury Motors, a dealership I've never heard of. Fury boils in my veins, but my legal instincts kick in fast. I dive into public records, heart pounding like it might explode. And there it is, just as I'd suspected about the man she was talking to. The dealership's owner is none other than Victoria Langston's brother-in-law, Gavin Langston. I immediately call the court archives where my friend Clara Evans works. She's stunned when I tell her about the car. Julian, you're the 7th person this month asking about car auctions tied to Pineview Heights. She sends me a batch of files right away, and what I see sends shivers of outrage down my spine. 9 other cars were sold the same way in just 3 weeks. The victims aren't random. Mrs. Larson, a 73-year-old widow, lost her late husband's vintage Buick. The Ortiz family had their delivery truck snatched while they were visiting a hospitalized relative. And Dr. Ellis lost his Lexus during a night shift at the hospital. All sold for next to nothing, all funneled to Langston Luxury Motors. This isn't a coincidence, it's a filthy conspiracy. I spread the documents across my dining table, hands still shaking with anger when the doorbell shrieks. Mrs. Larson stands there, clutching a stack of papers, tears welling up. I've been too scared to speak up, she whispers, her voice breaking. She hands me threatening letters from Victoria, each one crueler than the last, warning her house could be leaned if she resists. I put an arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her when the security camera suddenly blares an alert. Victoria's out there, snapping photos of my empty yard, muttering into her phone. I switch on my phone's directional mic, a gift from my tech-savvy daughter, and her voice comes through crystal clear. Gavin, hurry up and move the cars across the border. This judge is digging. My blood boils. Not only is she abusing power, she's running a criminal racket. I open my laptop, pulling up the HOA rules. Section 19 states clearly, no car can be towed without 45 days notice and at least 4 warnings. We didn't get a single one. The rules also demand a resident vote for any parking policy changes. But there's never been a meeting like that. Then I find a document that freezes my blood. Bank statements showing big payments flowing into Victoria's personal account right after each car sale. Her brazenness makes me want to slam the table. This isn't just rule breaking, it's organized crime. The doorbell rings again, more urgent this time. Miles Donovan steps in with 2 other neighbors I recognize from the towed car list, the Ortiz family and Dr. Ellis. Judge Maxwell, you need to see this now. Miles whispers, his tone sharp with urgency. He opens his phone, showing me photos of a hidden lot behind Langston Luxury Motors. Mrs. Larson's Buick, still bearing her late husband's disabled veteran plate, is being loaded onto a truck, bound for somewhere else. I rush to copy the evidence, preparing my files, when the camera blares another alert. Victoria's out there now, slapping violation notices on every car parked in a driveway along the street. But through the screen, I can see the panic on her face. She glances around, jumping at every little sound, like a cornered animal. She knows someone's watching, but she has no idea we've got a mountain of evidence ready to crush her. I close my laptop and look at the group in my living room. Mrs. Larson sits up straight, her eyes steadier now. The Ortiz family holds hands, a flicker of hope returning. Tomorrow, I say, my voice solid as steel, we'll show Victoria what happens when she messes with the wrong person. But first, I need to call my friend at the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit. The next morning, I arrive early to set up the community room for an emergency HOA meeting. My hands are steady as I connect the laptop to the projector, though my heart races like it might burst. 30 minutes before the start, residents trickle in. Mrs. Larson, who lost her precious Buick 6 weeks ago, sits in the front row, clutching a stack of documents. Behind her, the Ellis family whispers about their son's first car, gone just 2 days after he started college. Victoria struts in, 8 minutes late, in a brand new Chanel dress and high heels pricey enough to cover someone's rent for a year. Her brother-in-law, Gavin, slips into the back corner, trying to shrink into himself, though the gleaming gold watch on his wrist betrays him. The room's packed. I've never seen an HOA meeting like this. Victoria slams her fancy pen on the podium, her arrogant voice cutting through. Let's make this quick. I've got a dinner gala downtown. I stand, walking slowly, letting my judge's badge dangle from my neck like a warning. No rushing this, Victoria, I say sharply. This is going to take some time. As I step forward and introduce myself, for those who don't know, I'm Julian Maxwell, judge of Fairhaven District Civil Court. Victoria's face goes pale, like her soul just fled her body. Gavin, her brother-in-law, jolts up, his chair scraping the floor, aiming for the door. But Miles Donovan's faster, quietly blocking his escape. Today, we're going to look at a few interesting things. I continue, pressing the remote. The projector hums, showing crisp security footage. Victoria directing a tow truck hauling my Mercedes away at 1 in the morning. This is from 4 days ago, I say. Check the timestamp closely. 1:13 a.m. Now let's see the HOA rules on towing. I click again and up comes the regulation, written by Victoria herself. Section 47 demands all towing happen during daylight with 60 days notice. Not one of us got a single warning. I play more clips of nighttime tows from other residents' homes, each image a glaring proof of her brazen abuse of power. Victoria scrambles to save face. Those were all cars violating neighborhood standards, like that rusty Buick of Mrs. Larson's. I spin the screen, showing auction details. You mean the Buick your brother-in-law's dealership bought for $3,000 and flipped for $60,000? I glance at Gavin, but he's gone. The back door swings shut behind him. The room erupts with angry voices. Residents stand, waving papers and photos of their stolen cars. Victoria's hands, nails painted garishly, tremble as she taps the podium, her control slipping away. You're all ridiculous, she screeches, her voice cracking. I'm protecting this neighborhood's property values. You people broke the rules. I fire back, cool but commanding. What rules, Victoria? I've got the original HOA bylaws from the county recorder's office right here. They're nothing like what you've enforced. Turns out you've been using a fake version. Never voted on. Mrs. Larson shoots up, her voice shaky but firm. My husband spent 25 years restoring that car. We had all the proper permits. The Ellis family cuts in, eyes red. Our son saved 4 years for his car. Victoria's composure shatters. She snatches her designer purse, lunging toward Miles, but freezes when she spots camera lights in the hallway. I tipped off the local press without a word, and Miles is wearing a hidden mic. Victoria, I say, like handing down a ruling, sit down. We haven't gotten to the money flowing from your personal account to the dealership yet. Oh, and by the way, the FBI's waiting outside to ask about those cars crossing the border. Her eyes widen in panic, her face twisting as she realizes her empire's crumbling. But the real terror hits her next. Miles stands, his voice booming like thunder. "I'm not just a neighbor. I'm an investigative reporter with Channel 9 News, and I've been tracking this HOA car theft ring across 5 states. The room buzzes with stunned gasps as Miles hooks his laptop to the projector. My hands grip the podium, my breath heavy as images flash on the screen. Dozens of cars illegally seized by the HOA, all sold through the Langston family's dealership network. Their scheme's clear as day. Target homes when residents are away, invent absurd violations, then rush the cars to auction before anyone can fight back. Mrs. Larson, who lost her son's precious Buick 8 weeks ago, sobs as she points at a photo. Her car sits in an Arizona lot, repainted, priced 4 times its auction value. Nearby, the Ellis family spots their SUV, called Trash by Victoria, when they were visiting relatives in Texas. Miles shows more surveillance. Victoria meeting HOA members from other towns in upscale restaurants, coaching them on tweaking rules to legitimize car thefts. Bank records reveal consulting fees funneled through shell companies. With my judge's experience, I count at least 12 federal crimes in this pile alone. But what silences the room is Miles' map. Red dots marking car thefts cluster around low-income neighborhoods and retirement communities. Victoria deliberately preyed on the most vulnerable, betting they couldn't fight back. "There's more," Miles says, pulling out a thick file. "Remember last year's charity car show Victoria hosted? Every donated classic was a car she seized, then claimed tax deductions for herself." I look at Victoria, her face ghost white, hands furtively texting under the table. Miles catches my eye and nods. His team's been tracking her communications. Evidence safely stored. The Donovan's college fund car, the Harper's wheelchair van, the Sullivan's bakery delivery truck, all sold through Gavin's dealership. Each story a piece exposing how Victoria built her luxury wardrobe and vacation homes on her neighbor's pain. My phone buzzes. A text from the FBI Economic Crimes Unit. They've been waiting for someone with the clout to topple Victoria's operation. And me, a judge turned victim, am the key they need. I look up at Miles. He smiles and nods with quiet confidence. "Judge Maxwell," he says, "it's time Victoria tasted real justice." The room falls silent, the air thick like before a storm. Victoria's phone suddenly pings. An email from my office, bearing an official judge's header, demanding all HOA records be preserved for a federal investigation. Her eyes widen, her face twisting in panic, as if she's just realized she didn't just anger an ordinary resident. She's triggered an avalanche ready to bury her entire criminal empire. 5 in the morning. My phone buzzes wildly with a text from Miles. "Turn on channel 11 now." I rush to the TV, hands trembling as I flick it on. Gavin Langston's dealership is swarmed by news vans, a reporter holding up a stack of papers, the evidence I'd painstakingly gathered. Rage surges as I watch the truth unfold live. Their corrupt network exposed to millions of viewers. Less than 2 hours later, the doorbell shrieks. Victoria stands there, still in her flawless outfit, but the makeup can't hide the desperation in her eyes. "Judge Maxwell, this is a huge misunderstanding," she stammers, clutching a designer purse pricey enough to buy a small apartment. "I can explain everything." I invite her in, keeping my voice calm. Miles had secretly set up a legal recording device in the living room last night, ready to catch every word she utters. Victoria's excuses shift like the wind. First, she blames a system error, then pivots to pinning it on Gavin, before whispering, "Can't we settle this privately?" I pull out a stack of documents and spread them across the coffee table. Photos of every car she stole, bank statements exposing dirty money trails, testimonies from elderly victims who lost their only means of survival. "Gavin sold my Mercedes to the Torres family in Idaho," I say, sliding the sales contract toward her. "A family of 4, low-income, thinking they scored a great deal. Did you think of them when you cooked up this scam?" Victoria clears her throat. "They should thank me. I kept this neighborhood's value high. Messy cars drag down home prices. Don't you get it?" She grabs her phone, hands shaking as she frantically texts. Through the window, I spot more news vans rolling in. Miles timed this perfectly. His stories spreading across local channels. Victoria's phone buzzes non-stop, messages from HOA board members scrambling to distance themselves. The final blow lands when Mrs. Larson, 71 years old, appears at my window, supported by her grandson, heading toward the news crews. They share their heartbreaking story. Victoria took their family car while Mrs. Larson was hospitalized, the car still holding her late husband's last oxygen tank in the trunk. Victoria's phone rings, Gavin calling. Her face turns ashen as she listens to him confess. He's cut a deal with investigators to save himself, selling her out without a second thought. She leaps up, dropping her expensive purse. Dozens of credit cards spill out, each tied to a shell company linked to the stolen cars. As she fumbles to gather them, red and blue police lights flash outside. Victoria looks up, her panicked eyes meeting mine, finally grasping the abyss she's dug for herself. "I'll fix this. I'll find your car," she pleads, her voice breaking. I open the door, and 2 FBI agents step forward. "This isn't about my car anymore, Victoria," I reply. "It's about every car you stole, every family you shattered, and every law you trampled because you thought you were above it all." An agent reads her rights as neighbors gather on the lawn, some sobbing, others hugging in relief. Miles films quietly, Mrs. Larson's grandson flashing me a thumbs up from afar. The crowd cheers as Victoria's led to the patrol car, still yelling about property values. But this is just the beginning. My dining table groans under evidence of similar schemes stretching across 7 states. Tomorrow, I'll start something bigger. Restoring justice not just for Pineview Heights, but for every community tormented by power-hungry HOA tyrants who forgot the law applies to them too. On the morning of Victoria's trial, I step into the courtroom with a heavy heart. Miles is waiting, arms wrapped around a thick stack of files, fresh evidence from the FBI's raid on the dealership. They'd uncovered a secret room packed with records dating back 15 years, revealing how Victoria and Gavin targeted residents across 9 different HOA communities. My hands tremble as I flip through the pages. A system built to exploit. They fabricated fake rules not found in any official HOA documents, waiting for people to leave for vacation or work night shifts before towing their cars. They even used coded messages to pick targets. Clean up time. Their brazenness makes me want to scream, but I know justice is coming, and it won't show mercy. The courtroom that morning is packed, the air stifling like the calm before a life-changing verdict. I spot Mrs. Larson, the widow who lost her late husband's vintage Buick, sitting in the front row, her eyes red but resolute. Behind her is Mr. Bennett, robbed of his specialized wheelchair van while he was hospitalized. Even my old friend, Judge Sullivan, is here. His son's car was one of their earliest targets years ago. Victoria walks in, her orange prison jumpsuit replacing the designer dresses, her once elaborate hair now flat, her gaze dodging mine like a defeated foe. Gavin, her brother-in-law, sits across the room, whispering anxiously to his lawyer, hands shaking. Security cameras caught him trying to shred documents the night before his arrest, but the FBI had already backed everything up. Nothing slipped through. The evidence piles higher, fueling my urge to shout in outrage. Miles' investigation reveals they raked in over $5 million selling stolen cars. They set up secret accounts across 4 states, using fake names to hide the dirty money. But what silences the courtroom is this. Victoria had been running this scheme for years. She'd move from city to city, infiltrating HOAs, stealing cars, then vanishing when residents grew suspicious. Her audacity burns through my patience like wildfire. One by one, victims stand, their voices trembling as they recount their pain. A young nurse losing her only way to work, tears streaming down her face. A retired teacher forced to sell his home because he couldn't get to the store anymore, his eyes hollow with despair. Each story pierces Victoria's core. She bows her head, but not a single apology escapes her lips. Then, something unexpected happens. The court's phone buzzes non-stop with calls from other neighborhoods. They'd seen the news, recognized Victoria from their old HOAs. Evidence floods in photos, threatening letters, tow receipts. The FBI has to set up a hotline just to handle the complaints about her. The breaking point comes when they locate my Mercedes, in a town 8 states away, now in the hands of a family who had no idea it was stolen. The dealership had forged papers to make it look legal. I decide to let that family keep the car. They need it more than I do, and watching Victoria face justice is worth more than anything. As I prepare to deliver the sentence, I scan the courtroom. Miles is still scribbling, his pen moving without pause. Mrs. Larson grips Mr. Bennett's hand tightly, a spark of hope flickering in their eyes. Victoria's perfect plan crumbled because of blind greed. She never bothered to check who owned that Mercedes. Victoria Langston, I declare, my voice booming like thunder, you're sentenced to 18 years in prison and ordered to fully compensate every victim. Gavin Langston, 12 years. But the real victory isn't in locking them away, it's in the moment those broken families reclaim justice, their shoulders lifting after so many days bowed low. That night, driving my new car home, I deliberately avoid parking in the front yard, a bitter smile curling my lips. One stolen Mercedes brought down an entire empire of corruption. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Larson and Mr. Bennett, has rewritten every rule to protect residents, installing cameras everywhere so no one dares abuse power again. At our monthly community meetings, we sometimes laugh, recalling how Victoria smugly thought she could outsmart a judge. But deep down, we carry a hard-earned lesson. When ordinary people unite against those who abuse power, justice will always prevail, unrelenting and true. The story of Julian Maxwell and his fight against Victoria Langston's abuse of power and corruption in Pineview Heights mirrors a reality that's all too common in today's world, those who exploit their positions for personal gain, heedless of others' pain. From local boards to larger organizations, greed and a lack of transparency can creep in, harming communities, especially the most vulnerable. Yet through this tale, we also find a hopeful lesson, the strength of unity and resolve. When people stand together, wielding truth and justice as their weapons, no tyrant can remain untouchable. In our lives today, we can apply this spirit by closely monitoring rules, championing transparency, and refusing to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. A quick note, this story is meant for entertainment and education only. It's not intended to judge, criticize, or offend any individual or group. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to help spread these meaningful lessons. Thanks for watching this video all the way through. Wishing you a peaceful day, and I'll see you in the next one.